I really like going to bookstores and just looking at all of the random novels and manga that they have in stock. I usually spend quite a bit of time just pacing back and forth trying to see something that stands out and pulls my attention. And the last time I went, there was one series specifically that really stood out to me because of its beautiful cover. So of course, I bought the first 3 volumes on a whim and promptly forgot about them entirely because I'm an idiot that just forgets to read all of the books that I buy. I have a countless number of books on my shelf that I've yet to read, but eventually I'll get around to reading them all. Just not now. But I specifically set this series aside so I would actually remember to read it this time, and I finally got around to reading it. Beyond the Clouds is a very lighthearted fantasy adventure series following 2 younger children, Theo and Mia, as they set out on a journey to see the world and figure out where Mia actually came from. Theo is a kid that loves books and stories about adventures and is just really interested in learning as much as possible and just seeing everything the world has to offer. He works as a repairman and is pretty good at it, and can make little inventions and stuff when he needs to. And while he's out on one of his jobs, he ends up finding an injured Mia who's lying in a pile of trash that he refers to as the Island of Dreams. And just for a little context, the world this is set in has a lot of furry bait with various degrees of animal-human hybrids, and Mia is one of the rarest ones as she has wings, which are very valuable for unspecified reasons. But one of her wings is actually missing when Theo finds her, and he ends up making her a mechanical wing so she can still have the ability to fly when she needs to. And she also doesn't have any memories of where she came from or how she even got there. So they're both just really determined to go out and find these answers and explore the world. It's definitely a series that's targeted at a much younger demographic, but there's been a few moments that are a lot more serious where the characters in the world might not be as nice and soft as it seems at first. As of right now, they've gotten into a couple fights, but it does that kids show style of like joke weapons where Theo constantly uses his random inventions that aren't really meant to actually hurt or kill anyone, but it does enough to get them out of the situation relatively unscathed. But within the first actual fight they get into, you learn very quickly that the joke weapons are really only part of Theo's arsenal, and all the other characters aren't exactly as nice as he is, which opens up a lot of potential for like actual villains and stuff, but I doubt there's going to be anything actually crazy going on, because it really just seems like a pretty warm and cute adventure story that doesn't really get too dark. Most of the conflicts end very quickly with relative ease. I'm definitely a much bigger fan of like the darker and more brutal worlds, but I do really like sitting back and reading a chill adventure story that doesn't really have a whole lot of chaos happening, and it's just a lot more of a nice adventure story that you can follow along with and really enjoy. Where it's not too serious, but it's serious enough that it keeps a steady pace of a story going, where there is an end goal and it's not just random snippets of the world. So far there's only 20 chapters, and it's pretty fast-paced for how much there actually is, with them going through a lot of different things already, and only really taking a few chapters at a time for each conflict they end up in, and then almost immediately moving on to the next thing, which I don't necessarily think the pacing is bad, but it does make it a lot harder to get to know the supporting characters and feel like they actually matter when they're basically brushed off immediately. That's one of the major complaints I have about the series, is just they've introduced so many well-designed characters, but you hardly get to spend any time with them. Having a world with actual humans and anthropomorphic creatures, it allows for such an interesting cast of characters, but it doesn't really give the same effect when every couple chapters the entire supporting cast has been replaced. It does make sense since they're moving from city to city and you can't really take all of the characters from each place into the next one, but you would think that they would at least spend a bit more time in each place to build up all of these supporting characters and actually give some depth to them, instead of continuously showing new characters with new personalities in every single place they go to every couple chapters. Like in chapter 11, they found their way to a merchant city and they spend 9 chapters there before leaving, and in that amount of time you do meet some really good characters, but you're just getting a very basic ground level of who they actually are, so you don't really even get to know the character that well. And speaking of, just a small spoiler because I want to rant a little about it, the character they meet, Nora, him and the Forest Sage were probably my 2 favorite characters thus far, and having Nora basically tease that he was going to join them but then not actually joining them really annoyed me, and I really hope in the next volume they end up bringing Nora in as an actual main character, because just immediately that character felt so good with Theo and Mia. And I think he'd just make a great addition to the main two, and it would obviously make it the generic 2 boys, 1 girl god trio stereotype. But it would make so much sense because Theo can't actually control that black cat demon thing. So when Mia loses control, they would at least have other people to try and help. And just having Nora and Tama around to help in that situation has already been proven successful. I really hope Nora joins up with them. Especially because it would alleviate a lot of Mia's worries about hurting Theo, and it just makes a lot of sense having another hand around to help out in those situations. Especially because Nora wants to be a detective, so why wouldn't they just immediately bring him to help along in the search? I don't know, I'm just kind of annoyed at how they parted ways. But it's not really the biggest deal. I'm sure we'll see him again eventually. But so far, this has been one of the most pleasantly wholesome adventure stories that I've read in quite a while. And it has some really great art, which is always a big selling point for me. It's done in this messy, painterly style, where a lot of the shading is a lot less harsh lines, and it's very layered, I guess. I'm not really sure how to put the style into words, but it definitely stands out amongst its peers. But these types of stories thrive off of their world building and character development, and while I think both are lacking a bit, there is a lot of potential for a very good story coming out of this. A lot of the character designs and the personalities are already really good. They just need to be a bit more in-depth and a bigger part of the story, rather than skipping around from person to person as much. And the world building in general has been quite interesting for me at least. With all the places they've visited so far having different plants and different architecture and just looking so interesting in general, not to mention they haven't even introduced much of the magical content yet, there's just a lot of possibilities for a really interesting world. And exploring the world with the character is one of my favorite things in storytelling, because both you and the character get to experience the same thing for the first time, and it really adds something to the story for me at least. Because it's just not really as interesting going to a city of merchants if the character lives there. But having them show up for the first time and falling into the traps of the merchants and just seeing how big the world actually is through their perspective along with your own perspective, I just find it really interesting. But I think if it was slowed down slightly and there was more emphasis on the characters that they meet and actually building up relationships with other people, it would just make it a little bit better. But for now, I think Beyond the Clouds is definitely worth a read, and I really enjoy it. Plus, it's only like 20 chapters right now. Just go read it. Come on. Do it. Anyway, thanks for watching.